You are standing in front of the works that Leonardo da Vinci or Giotto or Van Eyck themselves did actually paint all those centuries ago. Some of the greatest works ever made by human hands. The purpose of the National Gallery is to share the collections we have with the public. So we have a great responsibility towards the public, towards the collection, and of course towards the building itself. The National Gallery's bicentenary kicked off on the 10th of May 2024. That's the exact date on which the National Gallery opened in 1824. And the celebrations have been very wide-ranging across the whole country, and it culminated with the reopening of the Sainsbury Wing and with the complete rehang of the entire National Gallery collection. This is something that can only happen once a generation or generation and a half.
The National Gallery has not done this for well over 30 years. It's possibly the first major redisplay for 50 years. I mean, it just so rarely happens. So obviously, from my perspective, to have the opportunity to rethink how you display a collection like the National Gallery has just been beyond exciting. I mean, it really is one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my working career. But I think the other thing about it is that you are able to think through the experience of visitors now, how they could engage with a collection of this kind of quality. We are custodians of this world-class collection, and the representation is all about the public. It's all about people coming to engage with the collection, whether face-to-face in the galleries or indeed online. That's what it's all about. So the CC Land Wonder of Art redisplay of the collection is a special moment for a year, from May 25 through to May 26, where we will not be moving the collection around. Beyond that, we really think, having thought it through very carefully, that this way of displaying the collection is really how we want to take it forward for the next decades. Because we think it really speaks to what people really want to see in the collection, the kind of experience they want of how artists work collaboratively across centuries, across countries, but also, broadly speaking, the chronological suite, where you get a very strong sense of a beginning and an end, and then a journey in between. So although CC Land, The Wonder of Art, is actually, we're describing it as that, almost like a year's exhibition, this is really how we're now displaying the collection from now onwards.
There's one very interesting thing about the National Gallery's collection, and that's it's conceived very much to act as an inspiration to practicing artists, and that was a characteristic of the collection from the very start. So we've wanted to highlight and emphasize the way in which great art inspires great art from later generations, and I hope that comes across very clearly in the transversal displays in individual rooms, the juxtapositions and pairings. Those, I think, speak to a distinctive characteristic of the National Gallery's collection.
The National Gallery has displayed its collection over 200 years is a really fascinating part of its history. And obviously, right at the beginning, it's a very small collection of 38 works of art, which were displayed in a townhouse, literally on Pall Mall. So to start with, it was an aesthetic hang that was very similar to the way that old master collections would have been displayed in major London townhouses with the aristocracy and the very wealthy members of the middle classes. And then as the collection develops, and almost as if a kind of professionalism that would be much more akin to the way that we think about having a director or curators and scientific departments, the way that the National Gallery developed as an institution, really in the middle part of the 19th century landed on this idea of the National Gallery's remit as an educational institution. So then it really wasn't good enough to simply display the collection aesthetically, not worrying about which artists were next to which artists, just worrying about whether there was a big painting, a small painting, a medium-sized paintings, and how they fitted on the wall in a kind of what's called a salon hang, a very, very dense salon hang. That really wasn't going to cut the mustard, as it were, in terms of the National Gallery's remit. So From Charles Eastlake, who was the first director of the National Gallery in 1855, from then onwards, there was a very long, hard think about how to tell the story of Western European painting with the National Gallery's collection that was coherent and made sense for anyone who was visiting Trafalgar Square. And the site itself, of course, grew with the development of the Wilkins building and all the subsequent sort of wings that have been created. And that has always resulted in a rethink of how to display the collection. This idea of telling the story through the idea of a nation and a century being represented. And you would simply, as it were, join the dots between those galleries in telling that story. Now we feel that although that absolutely served its purpose in the past, and a chronology does make sense because people do think of time moving on and telling a story and the idea of a kind of progression from the early Renaissance through to the 20th century, that actually what you really needed to do was to complicate that a little bit by showing how artists were looking at artists of the past and how works of art that were directly inspired by someone, say, from the 17th century with a work of art from the 19th century, how that could be shown in the same room to tell that story, not across the gallery, not all 66 galleries, but at moments that made real sense. So for the CC Land Wonder of Art project, we did have some principles that we were all working to. I mean, number one, we wanted to celebrate one of the world's greatest collection of paintings. Number two, we wanted to show more works of art on display. So, in fact, we would normally show 750 works or thereabouts on the main floor of the National Gallery. We're now showing over 1,000. We also wanted to really work with the architecture because one of the outcomes of actually having certain galleries dedicated to certain periods and certain artists is that if the galleries are large, double heights, grand spaces, to have relatively small cabinet works of art sitting in those galleries actually felt slightly overwhelmed. So we were really tasking ourselves with thinking through how you can work with the architecture, have grand spaces, double hangs, and then in the smaller spaces, single hangs, and think about how the works of art actually sit in those spaces rather than just simply put them there because that's the room dedicated to, let's say, British art. So what we also wanted to do that actually speaks to that idea of working with the architecture is use design solutions that we would normally use in temporary exhibition spaces, and we do it routinely, but how could we use what we've learned from those kind of projects in the main displays themselves? For example, we've actually commissioned a whole suite of new, very high-tech display cases on the main floor. We've had display cases in the past, but this is much more systematic. Also, for the painted areas of the gallery, it's about half the gallery has got textiles on the wall and the other half is painted. For those galleries that are painted, we, for example, for something as famous as the Sunflowers by Van Gogh, we've actually done a strip of wall that's a different colour to the rest of the gallery to really emphasise the importance of the work of art, but also to some extent bring the space down a little bit for such intimate works of art within such grand spaces. And then we have actually interventions in big spaces. So, for example, in Gallery 34, which has always been the British Art Gallery, we've done an in-focus on Thomas Gainsborough, who is our most represented British artist with 12 paintings, to really have an in-focus in how an artist like Thomas Gainsborough uses his family and friends to look at different old master traditions, create works of art that are ambitious in order to exhibit and then move his career on, which to some extent is really the ethos of the entire rehang. How do artists look at artists? How do they further their careers, reimagine their artistic practice in order to push their own profession forward? And then elsewhere, we've actually looked at the medium that's actually being used and the techniques that are being used by artists, again, to show that this is a process of creativity rather than just finished objects. So in the Sainsbury Wing, we've got a gallery entirely devoted to gold grounds that are very famous and very evocative of the early Renaissance in particular. And then elsewhere, for example, we have a wonderful collection of pastels. And then, for example, one of the great triumphs for me of the redisplay is to have the courage to have one work of art on a wall. So one of my favourites is actually in the wall galleries where one of our most famous works of art, Seurat's Bathers at Asnières, is actually displayed on its own. On a vista, in fact, you look through the galleries towards it. But when you go into the space, you see that there's no works of art to left and right. I mean, something of that quality and importance we thought deserved to be on its own on the wall. Finally, one thing that visitors might not notice, but it's very much part of the project, is that it's not just a matter of the configuration of the works of art as you walk across 66 galleries. There has been a lot of time and effort put into deep cleaning, sanding down floors, changing the ropes on the barriers, and thinking all these things through, making it feel clean and fresh, but also a lot of time and effort thinking through the palette of colours that we have across the entire site. So visitors will notice when they go into the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist, you have much more neutral tones, a very dark, bold colour in room 41, where you'll see Manet's execution of Maximilian and other early Impressionist works by Monet. And then as you go through that sweep of galleries, you go into much lighter, neutral grey spaces until you get to room 46, where we've actually got one of our series of in-focuses on artists, and in this particular gallery, on the late Monets in our collection, where we've actually got an off-white colour, which is the kind of environment that has traditionally been associated with contemporary or modern art. And on the other side of the building, for the late Renaissance collections, we've actually gone for a very bold, dark, deep green that's almost grey, which we felt, given that we decided to actually display together Northern Renaissance with the High Italian Renaissance, that could really unify the displays. So we thought it through very carefully. We thought it through very carefully in terms of the lighting. We worked for the first time with a lighting designer across the main floor. So all of these things act as a kind of backdrop to the positioning and pairings and groupings of the paintings themselves. We've called the project The Wonder of Art for very good reasons, because actually what I would love people to leave the National Gallery feeling is joy and wonder and excitement about seeing a fantastic group of paintings and one of the greatest collections in the world. But I think I would also love it if people left the building feeling that they hadn't just engaged with the past and how people painted in the past, and it's not even just about the present, that actually what we're talking about is also about the future. That actually the creative process is a living process, and that there are artists now being inspired by the collection of the National Gallery, and that's how it's always been.
For me, it's always a thrill to visit a museum. There's something about the scale of the spaces. There's something about the sensation of being there with other people. It's the excitement of seeing works of art in all their reality there in front of you. And of course, these are the real works of art. You are standing in front of the works that Leonardo da Vinci or Giotto or Van Eyck themselves did actually paint all those centuries ago. You're in the presence, you're in the physical presence of some of the greatest works ever made by human hands. That creates a great sense of expectation, excitement. It gives rise to wonder. It gives rise to conversation. And I think coming out of the National Gallery, one feels enriched with an extraordinary experience of human creativity. The purpose of the National Gallery is to share the collections we have with the public, to create an ever closer relationship between the visiting public and the National Gallery's great paintings. That, I think, has significance for the future. It's a strong signal that we're sending out about the kind of National Gallery we are and we want to be. We're looking after our buildings and making them fit for the kinds of needs that they need to meet. And we want the experience to be extraordinary in every way. So it's about the quality of the welcome, it's about the quality of the materials, it's about the light in the building, and of course it's about the direct, extraordinary experience of standing in front of great works of art. We were very keen that we should take the opportunity to make a welcome to the public which was as excellent as the collection itself. And that's what lies behind the planning of the Sainsbury Wing transformation, which has been effected by Annabelle Zeldorf. The Sainsbury Wing was a very, very significant addition to the National Gallery itself, but also to the cultural landscape of London and the UK. It was opened in 1991. It was constructed thanks to the extraordinary patronage of the Sainsbury brothers, and the intention was that it should house the early part of the National Gallery's collection, the medieval and early Renaissance collection in purpose-designed galleries, and not only purpose-designed galleries, but galleries that were designed for those particular pictures. So the quality of light, the shape of the rooms, the succession of spaces within the Sainsbury Wing galleries was so carefully considered in enormous detail by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, working together with National Gallery curators and trustees. But the Sainsbury Wing offered a whole lot more. For the first time, the gallery had a proper lecture theatre, which we've had the opportunity to refurbish during our bicentenary year. It had a dedicated temporary exhibition space. It had facilities for the visiting public. So what the Sainsbury Wing meant for the gallery was a significant transformation and a significant shift so that the gallery could be a great metropolitan museum. The gallery, of course, was able also to increase the space in which it displayed its collections. What had previously been a quite crowded collection now could spread across these beautiful design spaces, both in the old building, the Wilkins building, and indeed in the new Sainsbury Wing spaces.
The Sainsbury Wing has been created nodding towards cathedrals and basilica of the Italian Renaissance and Italian palazzi. So in fact, the central nave of the Sainsbury Wing is meant to look like a church. And then the two wings to left and right are meant to look, for example, like the Palazzo in Mantua. So in fact, very different spaces, one secular and one religious. So if you work with that, then you again come to a kind of selection of works of art that work with the architecture, because that's how the architecture was configured. So down the centre of the Sainsbury Wing, you will only see religious works of art, mainly grand altarpieces or devotional works of art. And then to left and right, you will see religious works of art, but more private devotional works of art that might have been seen in the chapels of a palazzo owned by a Grand Duke. And then you will also see mythologies which were painted for palazzi. And you'll see many more works of art actually shown in display cases where you can see the front and back of works of art. And so we've accentuated that notion of 3D objects in the displays themselves. And then on one occasion, we've actually hung a crucifix from the ceiling. But again, it makes perfect sense of that particular work of art that you've put it back into the kind of context for which it was created, rather than the kind of context that a work of art like that would come into in an art gallery.
The Sainsbury Wing has been a sort of victim of its success in a certain way. Large numbers of people use it, and the transformation is really about approaching the National Gallery. There's a new piazzetta, the square on the square, as we've been calling it. As you approach the building, we've put the large letters of the National Gallery on the parapet. Your access into the building should be free-flowing and fluid. Once you're inside, you're in a space which is much lighter. The spaces for public use have been expanded, and it gives you a sense that you're in an art gallery, beautiful details from National Gallery pictures on this extraordinary digital screen. The sense that you're in a public space with lots of other people, and it creates a sense of expectation of what's next. You know, going up the stairs, you're on the first floor, you can see Paula Rego's Crivelli's Garden, the great work that she painted for the Sainsbury when it first opened in 1991. And of course, the new restaurant, which is run by Giorgio Locatelli at the National Gallery. And then, of course, you continue your way up the stairs. You'll see the new commission from the artist Richard Long at the top of the staircase. Long, an admirer of the gallery's collection. A great pleasure to have him make his mark on the building and on people's experience of what they see. Very exciting new addition to the gallery and a new association with a great contemporary artist. You then see the early collection in the Sainsbury Wing magnificently redisplayed, or you can turn right and go into the main building of the gallery and see the collections there also represented in a new way. Every single colleague, every single staff member at the gallery has been involved in some way in celebrating the gallery's bicentenary. You know, from the curators to the picture restorers to the people working in digital, to the people taking art on the road, to the colleagues who look after the new learning centre, and the team, of course, who are responsible for moving the pictures around and redisplaying them on the walls, the gallery's art handling team who every day handle these precious and extraordinary works that we are the custodians of.
We've created this project over a period of about 10 months. So the Wonder of Art rehangs have been happening during that period. It's taken about 18 months to 2 years to plan it. The actual strategy and the discussion around it has been longer. One of the great things about the project is that there's so many major parts of it that probably won't be visually obvious to most people, but they're things that we've achieved, which would have been achieved over a much longer period of time, maybe 5 years or even 10 years. So what we've actually done to prepare for the Wonder of Art has set us up for further projects or further strategic aims that the gallery might want to achieve in the future in the next 10 or 15 years. So that's also been extremely beneficial. We've expanded the team. The team's about twice as big as it normally is. So we've brought in very skilled technicians that we haven't used before, and that then have to adapt to our system. And from their point of view, the people that we've brought in have never experienced the way in which we do things before, but have adapted fantastically and enthusiastically. And that's fantastic, because it's very positive. That's a very positive team aspect that you think can easily go the other way in a project like this, but definitely hasn't. So I've been incredibly impressed by everybody. So that's been a real highlight. Amongst all of us that are involved in the project, one of the major factors is what we've done with the Sainsbury Wing. So I've rehung Sainsbury Wing maybe 5 or 6 times in my career, and this hang, which I hope will be the final hang that I get involved in, is really one of the most beautiful hangs that I've seen. I'm hoping that the public will respond to the new Sainsbury Wing and see it for the efforts that we've put into it to really bring these works, give them a new life within the display, give them a new life within the collection. Essentially what I'm hoping is that either people that come here a lot, or people that it's their first time visiting, will reach that state that you need to reach with art, that state of wonder that art can bring you to. As I think once we've had a little rest and got over it, the way in which we feel about the collection, when we, in our spare time, wander around and look at what we've done with it. Yeah.
I think unless you've actually worked in the museum and gallery world, where you are regularly moving works of art around the building, but certainly a project like this, which is so enormous and so rare, I think you might be forgiven for thinking that it's relatively easy and it's done overnight or it's done in a few weeks. But in fact, the rehang of the collection had been going on for a better part of a year. And this has involved many, many members of staff, and all these different departments have literally pivoted towards this project to make it happen. And it really has been a logistical challenge, but my goodness, all members of staff have totally risen to the occasion.
I very much hope that visitors to the National Gallery will feel ever more that the collection is theirs, that this museum is theirs, that they are stakeholders, that they are owners. They can have the experience of visiting the National Gallery's wonderful collections with other people. It's a communitarian experience. It's not something you do on your own. You're in front of the real works themselves. There's a very interesting relationship between the spaces, the light, the works on the wall, and the people around you. It's a sort of totalizing experience, and it's one that I hope people can enjoy immensely. As I think of the future, I hope that we made a contribution to the well-being of the gallery into the future. And I hope very much that what we've looked after and tried to be the custodians of to the best of our abilities now can benefit future generations of visitors to the National Gallery.